was your break? Good?
Amazing.
Good? All refreshed now?
Very good.
Let's start. So this is session 2 of 3. So this section is identifying potential risks and hazards in the workplace and implementing effective control measures for a safer and healthier environment. The session outlines and key points for this session is identifying and categorizing workplace hazards, physical, chemical, biological, economical, and physiosocial. We're then going to assess and prioritize risk based on likelihood and severity using a risk assessment tool. We will also go through a risk matrix if you've never seen one. We're then going to implement and monitor control measures by using the hierarchy of control to ensure a safe and compliant workplace. So what is a hazard? Do we know what a hazard is?
Yes, something that could potentially put you or others at risk of hurting yourself.
Beautiful. Okay. So a hazard is a situational thing that has the potential to cause harm. Alright, or easily put into words, something that can hurt you. Now what is a risk then? So if that is the hazard, what is a risk?
The chance of happening, the chance of that happening from the hazard.
Thank you, Jim.
That's like that.
So it's a risk, right? The risk is the possibility that harm may be caused when you're close to a hazard.
Yeah.
Right, or when you're exposed to a hazard. Then controls refer to any action, procedure, or mechanism put in place to reduce or eliminate the identified risk associated with a hazard. So identify hazards and controls as well as risk. All workplaces must follow a process to identify hazards and remove or reduce associated risk. In most workplaces, your employer or supervisor would have already identified and assessed the hazards and put control measures in place. However, there's always a chance for other hazards. Therefore, workers must know how to identify workplace hazards, associated risks, and then implement the recommended controls, report health and safety concerns. So there is a table in your, as well as your presentation, it's also in your activity book. It is the same picture, so it's just in regards to a hierarchy of control. It should be on the first page once you open your activity book. Just on the first page. So once you've identified something in the workplace that could cause injury or illness, you should discuss with your work team and your supervisor on how to eliminate it or do something to minimize it. So in your workplaces, you'd have safety officers, supervisors and other workers that you consult with. Why you do that is, again, to identify any hazards and controls in place. The hierarchy of control helps to plan the best way to deal with a hazard, as it provides a structure to select the most effective control. So when we're looking at these, so elimination is number 1. So if you cannot eliminate the hazard, you then substitute it. Okay? So can you substitute the hazard for a lesser one? Then if that doesn't come into account, where you can't substitute it, you'll then isolate it. So isolating helps lower the risk level. You then go into engineering controls. So can a guard or other engineering control be used? Then your least effective of the 6 are your administration controls. So what training and procedures are in place. And then your PPE. So what PPE is required and is it available? So this is just a short little video in regards to risk and a risk matrix, so what it is. So say for instance, you're working in a cafe, you then have a waitress, for instance, walking around, she spills hot water onto someone. What would the hazard of that be? Burns. So what is possibly a control that we could put in place to reduce that from happening?
Make sure the walkway is free of trip hazards.
Cool. What else? What about in regards to the waitress herself?
I was gonna say, have like, table service, so there's not people walking around.
Exactly right.
So in regards to,
And you said you carry a pot of water.
yeah,
So maybe they can have like a mechanical or something that you can put the water in.
A trolley or something.
Yeah, rather than her walk around herself.
maybe do we even know if she's being trained correctly on how to handle hot water?
Or maybe that's it.
That's true.
So we could potentially look into getting her correct training, right, where the admin controls come in place. Cool. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
You done good.
Okay, so now this is again a video about what a risk matrix is. Okay, so here we are.
Hello and welcome to this video on risk. We're going to have a look at what risk is and take a look at how to use a risk matrix. First of all, what is risk? Now, if you think about it, life is full of risks. From the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep, and even in between. For example, there are risks associated with breathing. Did you know that air pollution causes about 7 million deaths each year? There are risks associated with eating. Foodborne illness causes about 420,000 deaths each year. And then there's traveling. Road accidents cause over 3,000 deaths each day.
Whoa.
In fact, every day we have to make constant decisions about the risks we face. Now, there are situations in which we need to know what the risk is from certain events so that appropriate action can be taken. For example, what's the risk to health from a new influenza virus, an industrial chemical accident, or a bushfire? But first, what exactly is risk? Risk can mean different things to different people and in different contexts. But in very simple terms, risk can be thought of as the product of how likely someone is to be exposed to something bad, a hazard, and the consequence, which is how bad the outcome will be. Let's have a look at an example. Say you have to cross a road, and you're trying to figure out what the risk associated with this is. Let's take a look at some different scenarios. In the first scenario, our hazard is a bicycle. Let's assume there are only bicycles allowed on this road. Let's also assume that the road is not that busy, and there's only one bicycle every 5 minutes on that road. Now, because bicycles don't go on that road very often, the likelihood of the bicycle crashing into you is low, right? If the bicycle does crash into you, the consequence of that would be relatively low, wouldn't it? So in this scenario, the likelihood and the consequence are both low. Therefore, the overall risk is low. Now, obviously, if there are bicycles traveling more frequently, the likelihood of a crash would be higher. But the consequence, if a bicycle did crash into you, would still be low. But what if things were different? Let's change that bicycle to a truck. Now with a truck passing every 5 minutes, the likelihood of a crash would still be low. However, the consequence is far more severe. Now, imagine if it was a busy truck route, and trucks were going on this road very frequently. In this scenario, both the likelihood of a crash and the consequence will be high, which means that the overall risk would be high. You would even consider crossing this road, right? A simple way of visualizing this and figuring out the overall level of risk is by using a risk matrix. In a risk matrix, information about consequence and likelihood can be used to determine the overall level of risk. Let's have a look at a simple risk matrix. A risk matrix is basically a table or a grid with a measure of likelihood on one side and consequence on the other, graded from low to high. The combination of the two, which is the overall level of risk, can be categorized as low, medium, or high, and color-coded. So let's get back to our example. In the scenario in which there are bikes traveling very infrequently, the likelihood is low and the consequence is low. Therefore, the overall risk is low. When there are more bikes, the likelihood is high, but the consequence is still low, and therefore the overall risk is medium. Let's consider the truck now. In the scenario where trucks are infrequent, the likelihood of a crash is low, but the consequence is high. The overall risk is medium. And if it's a busy truck route, the likelihood and consequence are both high, and therefore the overall risk is high. So that's how a risk matrix can be used to determine the overall level of risk using an assessment of likelihood and consequence. There are many different types of matrices in use with varying degrees of complexity. They can have many categories and different grades of risk. They may also have different ways of defining categories of likelihood and consequence. For example, a high likelihood may mean that it's expected to occur in most circumstances, and a low likelihood may mean that it may occur only very rarely, such as once in 100 years. With consequence, a high consequence may mean multiple deaths, and a low consequence may mean only minor injuries. So, the risk matrix and the categories that are used can vary, and therefore should be relevant to the situation and context in which the risk assessment is done. Regardless of this, risk matrices follow the same principle. Although risk matrices have their limitations, such as being subjective, not being consistently interpreted, and not taking time frames into consideration, they are a useful and practical tool to categorize risk. And that's an introduction to risk and how to use and interpret a risk matrix.
Cool, what do we think about that?
Very good.
Yeah.
Do we understand it a little bit now?
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll carry on with the presentation. Right, at the end of it, I will then discuss just a little bit in regards to this. Okay? So you got the likelihood on this side and the consequence. So with these risk matrix, the consequence never changes, as stated in the video, but the likelihood always does. Say for instance, we'll take a cafe scenario. So we spoke about hot water being one. Right, if it was to be poured onto someone, what would the damage be? So you've got, what would the consequence be? Near miss, first aid, medical time, lost time, injury, or death.
Very cool.
I'd say medical.
Okay, it would most likely be medical. So we'd say this time would be almost certain, because we don't have any controls in place. Okay, so then we'll go to age 15. We then implement the controls we spoke about earlier. Then the likelihood would change, the consequence remains the same. The likelihood would drop to rare, so it would then change to L11. So using this risk matrix, at the end I'll give you some hazards, just work as a team to try and figure out what controls to put in place and what the matrix would be before and after. Assessing risk of hazards. So all identified hazards must be controlled to remove or reduce the risk of harm. To control the hazards, you need to assess the likelihood and consequences of the hazard occurring. Determine and implement the most effective control measure. To assess hazard, you need to work out the risk of a hazard. This is determined by asking yourself the following questions. So how likely is it to cause harm? How serious would the harm be? The combination of likelihood and consequence provides an overall risk category and that is assigned. To determine the overall risk category, you need to use a matrix tool. So, like that one on the table. The tools used in your workplace should be a part of your risk management procedure or hazard assessment forms. No matter what tools used in our workplace, the level of risk is calculated using the following formula. So level of risk equals likelihood and consequence. So if you open up to activity books, so these are different examples of common hazards. So manual tasks involving sustained or awkward postures, high or sudden falls, repetitive movements or vibrations. So picking up different boxes to restock your cafe. For instance, you've got cleaning products that you work with that can possibly be heavy as well. Gravity, falling objects, falls, slips and trips of people. So this could be quite a common hazard in a busy cafe environment. So noise, exposure to loud noise, again, we have a lot of people talking in there. Might have to readjust where certain people sit if they are sensitive in terms of their hearing. Electricity, exposure to live electrical wires. I'm not sure if this is the case for you guys in your work environment. Machinery and equipment, so being caught in moving parts or machinery. or being hit by moving vehicles. So you said that you work in construction
Yeah.
prior to wanting to work in a cafe?
That's why. That was my priority.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did you come across in terms of moving equipment, machinery equipment? Is there any times where it was like a near miss, possibly? Okay, Jim, you give me an example.
Yeah, what was that again? Ask the question.
So you said you worked bush tucker
Yeah,
in the bush,
yeah, before that?
but before that you've got construction.
Yeah, I was in construction before that.
So in terms of machinery and equipment, what could be an example for you?
We use forklifts on site. And so, yeah, we were moving gear around with that, and so we always had to isolate the area. We would pre-start before we got on the forklift to make sure it was all okay, and then we had a certain way of starting it, like advising people by picking the horn, a certain one. And then we would, we would barricade area, and honestly work within a barricaded, isolated area.
But I reckon what a hazard would have been is people standing in the ways, like.
Oh, exactly,
being
common hazard, I'm
mindful
sorry.
Of
of
it.
where they are and
Sorry.
being aware of that.
That's okay, Jim.
That's what I think.
Yes, it is.
Cool, so then we go to hazardous chemicals. So working in a cafe or in Taylor's instance, working for Hungry Jack's, did you ever come across any contamination in terms of food with different chemicals possibly?
No, not necessarily, because we always had the chemicals stored in the far back corner of the building.
Awesome, so way away from where the
Yeah,
preparation
nowhere
food
near
is.
the food, yeah.
Yeah. So then you move to the other common hazards. So extreme temperatures, so heat and cold,
Yeah.
biological microorganisms, radiation, and then psychological is a big one. Because the environment that you work in is often quite busy, what are some struggles that you could possibly come across in that environment?
We call them SITXWHS005. When you have quite busy environments, that's when you have different groups of people working simultaneously, and you've got to constantly be aware,
Of your surroundings?
and their activities clash with yours or having to interact with your activities.
What about Taylor, when you worked for Hungry Jack's? What was the most overwhelming point of it? As it could be quite busy, eh?
Yeah, it can get very busy, and I feel like the most overwhelming part is when not everyone is keeping up pace. Then you just get flooded with
We're in a soft serve machine.
performance.
So we've got an activity. So open your activity books. I want you guys to find the hazards in this picture. Once you've located them, we will then discuss it together. Yep, so circle the hazards that you find on here, and we will talk about all of them.
How many should there be?
Yeah, so roughly about 7 or 8.
Okay.
So I've picked up 9.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, I thought.
Oh, awesome, Jim.
Yep.
Oh, 8.
Can I say them?
Yep, hang on just a second. Tandem, are you ready? Oh, are you ready?
Yeah.
So we'll go around, alright, and we'll identify one each, and we'll talk about why it is a hazard. So we'll start with Tiana.
The lady.
So what about the lady?
She is not wearing the correct PPE. She's wearing high heels and a skirt, and it is stuck in the conveyor belt.
What else can you see that she's doing for it?
She's too close to the machinery, she should be outside of the exclusion zone.
Cool, so that's one, Jim, and the other one is she's not watching what she's doing.
She's not what she's doing.
Alright, she's on her iPad, she's not looking around her. Okay, and as Jim mentioned, there's no exclusion zone. So she looks like she's from admin. Alright, possibly. There isn't any exclusion zone around here, which is why she's probably too close to this. So what's another one, Taylor?
I would say the guy bending down picking up the box. He is not doing correct manual handling and he's wearing gloves.
What else can you see from that person?
Oh,
He's got headphones on.
Okay, yeah.
So because, one, he doesn't have the correct posture, two, he doesn't have correct boots, and three, he's not listening or aware of his surroundings.
So there is a forklift right there too. That is leaking.
And it is leaking. Awesome. Jim?
Yes, so blind corner, so where the fork's gonna come around to the blind corner, you can't see there.
Oh.
Very good pickup. What else can you see about the forklift?
I can, about the forklift has got no exclusion zone, looks like it's got a leak underneath it, the back wheel. And it's got a leak, the blind corner, like,
I can't see any signs either for like speed
No.
limits or.
So there's no sign, but what's also missing on here is mirrors.
Oh.
Right, so if he's going forward, he'll only see if he turns his head. There's no mirrors on here. So that would be a hazard because what?
He can't see his blind
Not
spots
aware of
in the
his
back.
surroundings either.
So he can't see blind spots, but he's probably not aware of his leak either.
yeah.
Unless of course he has to reverse. In this motion he looks like he's only going forward.
Yeah.
Got no mirrors.
Right, Tandon, what did you pick up?
I'll pick the electric wire on the below.
Yeah, so exposed wires,
Yeah.
Oh,
Which is
hazardous, yep. What else?
and the other one is the lady.
No, so we spoke about the lady, so what can you see in this picture, this part here?
The man who arranging those stuff.
Yep. So possibility of him getting hit by the boxes. One thing we also didn't pick up, so see how he's wearing a helmet?
Yeah. Oh, no one else is.
Okay, so they look like they're in a working area.
yeah, no, fair enough.
They should be wearing helmets.
I drew a helmet on this problem.
You drew a helmet on them, very good, Jim.
Thanks, mate.
Okay, so when you're working in environments where you're around machinery,
Yeah,
or this looks like a potential construction place, right? Construction place. Yeah, so he's not wearing a helmet. He's not, is he?
That guy rearranging the boxes is wearing gloves. Does that mean everyone else should be wearing gloves?
So possibly, yeah. Could be another thing. Alright, he's obviously not wearing gloves.
You just got a one side.
He's wearing sandals, so. Very good, guys. We managed to pick up quite a few hazards in there, right?
yeah.
And now we're learning how to identify the hazards. Alright, so these are the potential risks from the common hazards we spoke about. So manual handling can get damage to joints, ligaments and muscles. Gravity, so this is an important one. So it could cause fractures, bruises, lacerations, permanent injuries or death.
Yeah.
So it's always important to have right signs up,
Yeah.
no matter what you're doing. Noise, so permanent hearing damage or loss. Electricity, so shock, burns, damage to organs and nerves, possibly death as well. So machinery, again, injuries causing possible death.
Yeah.
Same with this one, so respiration, illness, cancers or dermatitis. Hazardous chemicals. And that is quite a common hazard in your industry that you're going to start working in once you finish this course.
Which is what, sorry?
So the hazardous, so you'll be using quite a bit of chemicals. And you'll also learn about food preparation in this slide as well, in this session. So obviously extreme temperatures, right, heat can cause burns and heat stroke, cold can cause hypothermia and frostbite. Biological, COVID-19 was a big outbreak. for us in the last few years. Then you've got different diseases, HIV, AIDS, or allergies. Radiation, burns, cancer, or blindness. And again, psychological, mental health, physical, or work-related fatigue. And that is quite a big part of anything you do, especially in terms of working and your working environment that you're in.
Mentally ill.
So I've also just put another one in relatable to, of course, what you're going to be going into. So it's a cafe environment. So what other controls that we could put in place to minimise the risk? So I want you to circle again the hazards, but this time tell me what controls we can put in. Yeah, there is quite a few in this one.
You just say them instead of writing them? Treat them?
And maybe we could go through this one together.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go from left to right.
Yep.
So let's start on this section. So in this section, what can we see?
Chemicals.
So the chemicals. So should that be near prepared
No.
food?
No.
No.
Needs to be stored somewhere.
Thank you. Now what else can we see? Just on this section
The
here.
burning,
Patty's unattended either.
Yeah, no one's there either.
or the oven doors open.
This looks like it's burning
Also,
also.
heat exposures, the spills, but we're not there yet.
Alright, what about if we look here?
He's not wearing PPE.
He's not wearing gloves, but we can see that he's pulling the oil up too high. Right, and there's flames right next to it.
Oh,
There's an open stove right next to it.
There's not enough people.
So there's flames here. This patch, I think, from the picture is oil.
You're
Yeah.
so right. That would also be a psychological hazard because there is not enough staff.
Yeah.
Overwhelming, yeah.
And that would
Overwhelmed.
cause stress to them.
And that's where we talk about one of those common hazards, right? Psychological,
Yeah.
mental health. Okay, if you're under stress continuously, this type of environment will not help. Alright, so what else are we looking at? So what about if we look here? There's two sections.
Chips on the ground.
Chips, spills, no one's there to put signs up. Again, there's no signs in there.
So
So they're not aware of what they're doing. There's also a sharp knife on the edge. Alright, she's also not wearing what?
Gloves.
Gloves.
Or
Can
Incorrect
we
storage
see-
at the back too.
Yeah, or chopping board. Can we even see any containers that she's putting the food into?
No.
Nothing.
She's not
Tandem.
even wearing a hairnet.
No, she's not reading it yet. Thank you, Taylor. Good for cuts. What else, Tandem?
Oil.
So I was looking
So
about
we've got here,
Incorrect manual handling.
incorrect manual handling.
slip trips and falls. Pinch points.
The customer looks angry as well.
So probably that's taking too long, possibly.
Yeah.
Another thing I could think of, right, because they're short of staff, maybe she's helping in there as well, but she doesn't have any gloves on. She's going to be handling money.
That's true.
But I will add, when I worked at Hungry Jack's,
Right.
front counter staff do not need to wear it.
But see, it's different in Hungry Jack's, isn't it? So you got the front counter and then towards the back is where they start to prep the food.
Yeah.
So in this section,
I guess it's all one section, yeah.
yeah, if it was maybe cut it off
If it was
maybe, or
split,
put
yeah.
something there, it would be easier. I think that's all the hazards that I could pick up
Yeah,
to.
that'd be good.
Could you also say that, like, I mean, she's wearing an apron, like the guy at the deep fry.
Is it?
Yeah.
Very good, thank you, Taylor. I didn't even see that one, thank you. So what controls then can we put in place?
More staff.
More staff, more training.
More cleanliness.
Alright,
PPE.
even knowing why this should not be there in the first place.
Yeah.
Separating that, having them in labelled containers.
Yeah.
Because this just has a skull on it, so obviously it
Could be anything.
that's right. But yes, if they had a different room, see this is like a storage room possibly at the back,
Yeah.
maybe an exit, they could have it in there, shelved. So we've done quite a few activities, so we might just skip this one. So we're just going to go through a quick little video about how to handle food safely. And then I think after this video we'll go for our last break before we continue on the last session. So Jim, we're just gonna watch this little video, and then we'll be good to go.
Keep going. Is that another one?
I have a question, Jim. So again, we spoke about biological being a factor. So bacteria, and these travel through food quite easily if they're not prepared or monitored correctly.
That's why I think we have to hold times.
That's very good.
Yeah, if the whole time expires, you have to throw the food out no matter how full it is.
I've got a question about this as well too. So chemical, bones, yeah. Hits, bugs, hair. Don't know about glass, but hair can potentially be a big one.
Oh, glass definitely.
Okay, so it brings us up to break times. Hey, I was going to ask you a question. You know how you said you had hot times?
Whole times.
Cold times.
Yeah.
So would that count if they had like cold fries underneath? And put
So-
fresh batch on and just mix it in?
So when, with the fries for example, once they've been cooked and they are in the hot box, they've only got 10 minutes. If that 10 minutes is up, you throw them out no matter what. Yeah. But in regard, like with all the fresh salads and stuff, as soon as you put salad into that container, you poked it into the fridge. It can only sit in the fridge for a certain amount of time, and once it's been put out onto the bench, it's only got, I think it's like 2 or 3 hours. Once that whole time's over and if there's still leftover lettuce, it goes straight to the bin.
So would that mean that the like meat in terms, right, will have their own section?
Yeah. And same with the meat, if you overcook meat and it expires its whole time, you throw that in the bin because it's no longer able to be served.
Cool. Sorry, I just thought I'd ask that. Alright, let's go for a quick 15-minute break.
15 minutes. Yeah.
Oh,